You're listening to the Under the Ring Report, a weekly podcast that asks the question, why pro wrestling? Here's your host, John the Flesh Wound.
And welcome to episode 22 of the Under the Ring Report. This past week, we lost the greatest manager and probably commentator in the world of professional wrestling, Bobby the Brain Heenan. So this week's episode, I'm having a little help. Cousin Tom will be in later. And we're going to talk with Scary Terry and talk about our memories of Bobby the Brain Heenan and what he meant to us in the world of professional wrestling. So let's jump right into our interview where we first talked to Scary Terry here on the Under the Ring Report.
I hated that son of a... I won't say that word here because the man's dead, but I hated him when I was a kid. Oh my God. I just could not. Every time he came on the screen, I was angry because I knew he was going to screw over Hulk Hogan. I knew he was going to screw over Randy. I knew he was going to screw over whoever was wrestling against Hercules Hernandez or whoever else was in Bobby's roster. Oh my God. I just, yeah. Oh, and then they'd have him on the announce team and I hated him there too. Nothing filled my prepubescent rage more so than Bobby the Brain freaking Heenan. Hated the guy when I was a kid.
You know what's funny is I didn't like him as a manager. Because with the same idea that you talked about how against everyone, but I loved him on commentary. Because to me, it felt like it made what was going on more exciting than a Lord Alfred Hayes or Vince McMahon or someone like that. And maybe that's also as a young child thinking that I wanted to be in radio. Oh, okay, maybe that's subconsciously why I enjoyed him.
I didn't like him because he said mean things about the good guys, John. Hulk Hogan is a true American hero. Well, not anymore because he's kind of...
Yeah.
But back then, man, I was saying my prayers. I was eating my vitamins. And who was Bobby the Brain Heenan to say those things? You know who he was? The best damn heel in the world. Right. I mean, no offense to Paul Heyman. I love Paul Heyman, but the Brain operated on a completely different level, man.
Yep. Yeah. Man, I got to see him do his thing as a manager live. When he was managing Rick Rude versus the Ultimate Warrior that whole summer in like 88 or 89, came to a house show. Everything you see on TV, he did it at house shows that weren't even on TV. We were like right up in the front row, and there he was pulling on the boots, doing the cheating, looking like, and when the Warrior touched him, he'd give the old, oh my God, don't hurt me. And so, I mean, everything you see, that guy was a consummate professional, no matter what.
Absolutely. And just played the role perfectly. I mean, he drew nuclear heat. That moment where he had to wear the weasel suit. I will never forget that. That made me the happiest kid in the world to watch Bobby the Weasel get his ass beat while wearing a freaking weasel suit. That was the best ish in the world, man. Loved it. And now when I go back, of course, you watch your Saturday night main events and you watch all the old PPVs. Going back, I had an entirely new appreciation for what he brought to the table. The announce table and the ring, just a phenomenal performer. No other like him.
Well, and I also wonder if he was a little before his time. Because you fast forward to where we are now, where wrestlers are actors. They're multi-dimensional in what they're able to do. A guy like The Rock, Cena. He was kind of that way. He was more dynamic than Hulk Hogan.
Oh, yeah.
Even in that time, I mean, even when we may not want to say it, I think he had more to do how Hulk Hogan got over than Hulk Hogan. Because in a way, if you think about it, because Bobby Heenan and the family, the Heenan family, I remember WrestleMania 2 when it was Hulk Hogan versus King Kong Bundy in a steel cage.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know how much you hated King Kong Bundy, who by himself was nothing? But because he was part of the Heenan family, I'm just saying, I think that is what helped it. Because that, for about a 5-year period, and you think about when Andre turned and joined Heenan, how much did you hate him?
Oh, so much. You're making me mad all over again. You look at some of the guys on his roster, and just being in the Heenan family elevated their game so much and elevated their profile. I mean, let's face it, when Hercules Hernandez was rolling with the family, he was a bad guy, but then, he breaks away from Bobby. He does this thing. He breaks the chains or whatever, and then just kind of frittered off into the ether. No diss to Hercules. I liked his character back then because I was a muscle mark when I was a kid, apparently. But, man, Heenan, could you imagine what he could do with some of these characters in the modern era of wrestling?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you pair him with the Ascension, okay?
Oh.
Now you're getting
he can get him over.
Yeah, absolutely. You pair him with, the Authors of Pain. I like what they're doing right now, but you pair Heenan with the Authors of Pain. It's a shame that his health took the turn that it did before he died. That guy left way too soon, had so much to give, but what he gave, no way will it be forgotten.
And the thing too is I think some people tend to forget it wasn't the best of Heenan, but he was there too when WCW was kicking WWE's ass.
That he was.
And he was on that, and he had his moments, but I know he was nowhere near the Heenan before, but he was a big part of both those big booms in professional wrestling.
Absolutely. And may he rest in peace. May he hear his favorite song, which is not Hulk Hogan's entrance music, because that's his second favorite song. Yeah, just one of the best lines ever, man. So many great freaking one-liners. Incredible.
Did you have a chance at all, and maybe not when it actually was on TV, but did you see the Bobby Heenan show?
I've seen clips.
Okay.
I've never watched an entire episode, but the clips I saw, it was pretty dreadful.
It's bad, but oh my goodness. I think it only lasted 5 episodes, but yeah, it was before its time, but it also showcased his many talents he had.
Could you imagine what that guy would do with a podcast? Oh man, again, taken far too soon. Far too soon. Incredible talent.
All right, man. Favorite moment of all time, then, for you, if you have to look back, that had to do with Bobby the Brain Heenan?
The weasel suit. I think for as much of a comeuppance as that was, him taking that fall and taking those bumps and going through that just to pay it off, to make all those little kids who'd been watching Bobby Heenan screw over their heroes for so long. Good on Bobby for doing the job and making the day of millions of children worldwide. Because I got to tell you, that was as a wrestling fan, as a child, that was one of the best things I ever saw. That was beautiful.
All right, Ben. All right, wrestling fans, back with us. Cousin Tom has joined the show. Mr. Humanoid, thank you for joining us.
This ham and egger's happy to be here.
We did lose Bobby the Brain Heenan this week, and both of us, we grew up together, so we did a lot of watching wrestling and everything else. What to you stood out about Bobby the Brain Heenan that put him apart from anyone else?
Well, the thing about Bobby the Brain Heenan, which I didn't realize until looking back on things, is just how much he was involved with everything. Now, this is back in WWF days, not so much the WCW days, but WWF days. He was at ringside on commentary. He was the manager. He did the promos. If somebody was supposed to be the heel, Bobby was right there next to him. Pretty much, if you were Heenan family, everybody knew that's who I root against.
Yeah.
and if you think about all the people that he was put with.
Oh, my.
I mean, it's like a who's who of people.
Well, and they're all in the Hall of Fame.
And it was like, the more I look back on it, it's like, oh, my gosh, I forgot just how much he did.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, growing up, I can, in my mind, one of the things that stands out to me was WrestleMania 2. With King Kong Bundy, and he was part of the Heenan family at that time. And remember, they had the cage match with Hulk Hogan.
Oh yeah,
and I was so pissed off at Bobby the Brain Heenan because he took a guy like King Kong Bundy. Truthfully, King Kong Bundy was a big dude, but for personality's sake, charisma, he didn't have a whole lot. He wasn't the greatest talker,
right?
But Bobby the Brain could take anyone. It didn't matter who they were, and turn them into a big-time heel, which I think sometimes is what's missing nowadays in professional wrestling.
Yeah, well, you look at somebody like the Islanders, when he had the Islanders.
Yeah, that's right.
With Haku. Those guys didn't talk. They didn't need to. Bobby did all the talking for them.
Mm-hmm.
They just, one of the most memorable things I can remember is him instigating them stealing Matilda from the British Bulldog.
I forgot about that.
And I still remember him trying, get over here and get this dog. And you see him trying to, they're trying to carry Matilda, and he's behind them, shooing them to the back.
Mm-hmm.
And the crowd reaction, I still remember being a kid and getting mad, like they just took Matilda. I was hook, line, and sinker on that deal. And I always knew when he was at ringside, he was going to do something to interfere in a match. And that's why they called him the Weasel. He always was going to get in there and do something.
Well, and he did it better than anyone else, it seemed. I mean, it didn't matter who he brought into the Heenan family. He put them that third notch. If you had Heenan by your side, you knew that person was probably going to get a shot at Hulk Hogan, more than likely.
Oh, absolutely.
And when he got to the point where he had Andre the Giant in WrestleMania 3, holy cow. I mean, I think that was his pinnacle right there, with how they put him with Andre the Giant, one of the most beloved wrestlers of the time. And he was able to turn Andre into this legitimate heel.
Well, and if you think about when they brought Andre out to face Hulk in Piper's Pit, the first thing Hogan says is, "What are you doing with him?" Because Heenan was always the thorn in Hogan's side. And looking back on it now, it didn't dawn on me as a kid back then, but Heenan was always the guy that was bad-mouthing Hogan.
Oh yeah.
When he was the All-American hero, he was, oh, you can't trust this guy and all this and that. And every person that went after Hogan, Heenan played a part in.
That's true.
And when they brought Andre out with Heenan at his side, and he says, "What are you doing with him?" It was like, oh my gosh, he's with Bobby Heenan. That we all know what that means.
Gosh.
And you stop and think of, and I didn't think about it till recently, but the amount of people that he had that, you always knew him as heels, like, Rick Rude was always a heel.
Yep.
I forgot he was with Heenan.
Well, I watched
it.
Here's the funny thing. Here's the funny thing about Rick Rude, too. I watched an interview that Bobby did before he had, the problems with his throat and stuff. And I think it was maybe right after he left WCW. And he talked about all the guys that he worked with. And he said, of all the people, Rick Rude was pissed that they put Bobby the Brain Heenan with him as his manager, because he felt he was a good talker. And he thought that Bobby the Brain Heenan was stealing his thunder. That was, yeah. And Bobby said, he goes, of all my people, he goes, everybody I worked with was my, they were friends. I loved them. He goes, but with the Rick Rude, it was just a business relationship. That was it. Business strictly.
Yeah.
But yeah, for some reason, but what Rick Rude didn't realize was that was probably one of the pinnacles, because that was the first time that a Heenan family member in the WWF won a title. When he beat the Ultimate Warrior with the help of Bobby the Brain Heenan.
Right.
That put him over the top. I think that was one of the best feuds. I mean, I remember seeing them when they came to our hometown, and he was there wrestling. It was phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it now, they don't really have a lot of managers per se.
Yep.
There's people that'll come out, but they don't. There's not the involvement like there.
No.
With as far as talking goes, Paul Heyman would be the closest one to doing promos for people.
Yeah, and he's only around a little bit with just Lesnar now.
Right, with just Lesnar, and he doesn't do as much as he used to. But he's the only one right now I could think of. Jim Cornette was always a good talker.
Yeah.
But Bobby Heenan, he talked for him. He would do broadcasting of the matches, and then he always called it one-sided for his guys.
Yeah. Which made it
which
great.
Used to always, make me mad, which it was supposed to. And then if he needed to get involved, which he never needed to get involved, but he always did, just to make people mad and, do his job as he was supposed to do as the manager of whoever, whatever heel faction he was with. But if you think about it now, you don't have that in the current wrestling.
No. Well, and I think maybe that could be the problem. Because, I mean, you think about, you could go through his roster and look at some of the guys. I mean, they weren't good talkers, but they were great wrestlers and good at the roles they were put in. So if you had a guy like that, it was either Heenan, Jimmy the Mouth, the Slick, or Freddie Blassie, or one of those guys. They were always placed with them because they were great at talking. And they could take a guy who sucked on the mic, but make them a superstar. And I think sometimes now with the forced, they force some of these guys who are not good on the mic, they're not naturals, and they say, here, just read the script. Just memorize this. Instead of giving...
which is even worse.
Yeah, and I mean, because part of what wrestling is, and unfortunately people don't get that as much now, and I think that's why a guy like John Cena people like. When The Rock comes back, people like. Even a little bit Enzo Amore. I mean, he's kind of annoying sometimes, but he's got that ability, just the gift of gab per se. And there's these other guys you look at. Apollo Crews is a perfect example of a guy who needs a good mouthpiece. They're guys who could be great, but they just can't talk.
They just need somebody, yeah.
And I mean, exactly even Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns has his problems on the mic, and I think sometimes that's why people get so pissed off at him. If he had a heel manager with him, holy cow, would that make a big difference?
Oh, it would be huge, because now you're not talking about how many moves he did in the ring. Now you're mad because he keeps winning due to interference or something to that effect. There's something else, but so it takes away from the other things that you could pick apart.
And that's the sad thing now, because Bobby the Brain Heenan did such a great job during his era. We want someone like that to step up, and I really don't think, like you said, Heyman's good, but I don't see anybody else coming up that's going to be part of that roster and do that type of thing, unfortunately.
No.
Yeah. So,
and the other thing I always liked about Bobby Heenan was, and it goes with being a good talker.
Yep.
It's just on the fly. People can say things, and just off the cuff, it was bam, or, a quick little thing that as a kid I may not have picked up on, and then going back later and looking at it as an adult, it's like, oh, I got that joke now.
Well, and him and Gorilla Monsoon together, I think that's what really made me enjoy watching, because I watched the syndicated show on Sundays, and then I'd watch prime time on Tuesdays with him, and they just had a chemistry that made me enjoy wrestling. I mean, I think Jim Ross and Jerry the King Lawler are good, but they're not in the same league as freaking Heenan and freaking Gorilla, because those two had just this connection.
Those two, that was a different type of chemistry.
Yeah, and that's the thing I think about, and I kind of miss, because even Vince and Jesse Ventura had this chemistry, and I think that sometimes is what's missing, because Bobby just didn't matter who he was with. He just got in there and boom, here we go. I'm going to bring you along, and this is going to be a fun ride. And we could be watching Pedro Morales versus whoever. And it might be a boring match you don't care about, but he would make it meaningful, and that's the thing. And the quotes.
He and Gorilla, Gorilla was like the perfect straight man to Bobby's little one-liners.
Yep.
They just fed off each other. And my favorite part is when, Gorilla would get agitated or appear to be agitated, and then Heenan would, say something else to agitate him some more, and then, oh no, I didn't. He'd always try to backtrack and weasel his way out. That's why they called him the Weasel. But that was always my favorite. It was just the back and forth with those two.
Now the funny thing too is I talked to a guy I work with. He grew up here in Wisconsin, so they were lucky and they got to see the AWA all the time. And he told me that you should go back to the WWE Network and watch the AWA years, because if you thought Heenan was good in the WWF, his best years, they say, are with the AWA with Nick Bockwinkel.
I heard that. I heard quite a few retrospectives, and that was something that came up several times in this past week. And I may have to do that, because I remember Bockwinkel, but not with Heenan.
Yeah, and they said that those two together were just pure magic, and the Heenan family was there, and they said a lot of the stuff that you saw in the WWF, Heenan did it first and fine-tuned it in the AWA. And another guy I worked with used to be a bouncer and help out at the old Milwaukee Arena when the AWA would come in, and he had a couple stories he told about how ornery Heenan was. At that point, they hated him so much. A guy in the upper deck somehow pulled a bolted seat off and threw it over the overhead, trying to hit Heenan. And then the next time they came to town, this friend of mine was walking down the aisle protecting, he's a big guy keeping everybody safe.
Right.
And this dude tried to jump over the guardrails and took a swing at Heenan. And Heenan goes, grab him. So, the guy grabbed him to hold him back. Heenan turned around, popped him in the face. Bloodied the guy's thing, and then walked off.
That explains the story I heard this week from Mike Tenay, which, Mike Tenay from WCW and then Impact, whatever. And he said that when he worked with Bobby in WCW, they got to be pretty good friends, and they traveled together.
Okay.
But Bobby had one stipulation. Whenever they did a show, all of the bags from the hotel or whatever they had was in the rental car, packed in the trunk. It was ready to go. As soon as the show was over, they were the first ones out the door in the car and gone.
Really? How come?
Yeah. Well, they said it was because of Bobby's AWA years. He always had so much heat on him, he wanted to get out. He did not want to stick around. And they said one time they were in New York City, and they did that, and it was Heenan and Tenay and Tony Schiavone.
Uh-huh.
And Schiavone said, he goes, we jumped in the car, we're out before, everybody else is, and we get stuck in rush hour traffic. And people are on the sidewalk, and they're like, it's Bobby Heenan. And they're banging on the windows wanting to see Bobby Heenan. And he said Bobby's freaking out in the back seat, like, get us out of here, because he thinks they're trying to get him.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, you're such a huge...
They
just
love
want
you.
to see you, but from those AWA days, he's thinking they're wanting to tear him apart.
And that was it. They said back in the day, everybody wanted to kick Heenan's ass because he did such a good job. and the other difference, too, is in that time, people didn't really know the wrestling was, predetermined.
Oh, yeah, it was, exactly.
Yeah.
There was rumors, but yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
so a lot of people thought that that was really what's going on. But yeah, they say, though, that you have to go back and watch some of the AWA stuff because that is the best Heenan ever was.
I'll have to go back and watch that.
Yep.
As far as his one-liners, the probably one of the more famous ones, the one I still remember, it still cracks me up, and I use it every once in a while. He was on, I don't remember if it was prime time or what it was, but he was interviewing audience members, and the guy stands up and he's like, asks him the name, and he's, are you married? He's like, yeah. And the guy says, been married for 21 years. And he's like, well, you realize if you would have killed her on the honeymoon, you'd be out by now?
Oh, yeah.
It just cracks me up. And it was just off the cuff. There was nothing written down.
No, and that's kind of, I think, what made wrestling and made Bobby so unique, because now everything is so predetermined, manufactured, and they want it so precise. And I think that's what's missing, is to have someone just come out and just roll with it. Don't give him a script, just roll with it and have fun. And I think that's where his best work came from.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, taking a look back, what do you think is your most memorable Bobby the Brain Heenan moment?
I mentioned the one with the Islanders stealing Matilda.
Yeah.
I mean, but the other one that comes to mind is WrestleMania 3 with Andre the Giant, and not because Andre the Giant was with Bobby Heenan, but do you remember the little caravan fake ring they had set up that brought the wrestlers to the ring?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, like the golf carts that were decorated.
I remember that.
And so Andre's in there with. Do you remember the trash that was thrown at them?
Yes.
That was all because of Bobby Heenan.
Oh, yeah.
And going back and looking at it, the only other time I've seen trash thrown like that at a wrestler is when Hogan
did the turn, which Heenan was there. Heenan was there on the mic.
And and he said, "I knew it all along."
Yep. And that was the best part,
Yeah, I knew it all along. But I mean, those two, I'll still remember, him in the tux, and people just throwing trash at him because they're so mad that he got Andre the Giant to go against Hulk Hogan.
Now, the only regret I have is I quit doing the wrestling show in 2002 for a while, okay? And I got a call from Bobby's manager, handler, or whatever. He had a book coming out, and he wanted to be interviewed for the book. And I wasn't doing the show anymore and missed my shot at interviewing him. So but our sports guy got to interview him. And the one thing that I come back to every time when he was interviewing him, Bobby was talking about the book, and he goes, "I've been hitting the head with chairs so much, my head smells like ass." Funniest damn line I ever heard.
Yeah. You never knew what was.
No. And that is my one regret. I mean, I was that close, but, missed a shot to interview him. But, hey, it happens.
Yeah.
But
and I tend to remember Bobby more from the WWF days. I enjoyed him at WCW for a while, but then he just seemed like he was not enjoying himself. It wasn't the same for him.
Well, I read a thing about that. And during this whole time we've been looking at articles and stuff. The only reason he went to WCW was because they had guaranteed money and they had health insurance. And he still had a broken neck that he needed to get fixed. And that's why he went to WCW. That was the only reason. And other than that, he said it was a nightmare.
Yeah, I'd heard the same thing. That, Bischoff didn't like to give out what was going to happen. So, he's always prepared. And nobody would know what was going to go on in the matches. So how are you supposed to know how to guide the matches as a commentator?
That's right. Well, they were all worried. It was a different animal, but I'll tell you what, though, a true legend and just unreal. I mean, it's kind of a shame that it would have been great to, if he hadn't had the problems with cancer and stuff, it would have been so awesome to see him still be used after he left WCW. That's the most unfortunate thing is the throat cancer. I mean, the guy had a gift, and then to that be taken away, or something like that. But he still showed up at all the Comic-Cons. Oh yeah,
things,
yeah. Well, if you get a chance, go find his induction speech for the Hall of Fame. That was one of the last times he still really had his voice, and he goes on a rant about the World Wildlife Federation. And it is classic. That's all I got to say. Just go to YouTube. You'll find it. But, yeah, listening to Bobby just go to town on that stuff because he sits there and talks about, I don't know what they're talking about. We had a gorilla. We had George the animal. And he's going through all these wrestlers and stuff and just having a heyday.
Yeah, he, and going back to some of the people he worked with, Bockwinkel and AWA. Yep. But then when they brought Flair in, they put Flair with Bobby Heenan. Like, who would have thought to put Ric Flair with Bobby Heenan?
Yeah.
Everyone knew Ric Flair as a heel, but they put, and then you had Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig was with him. And then, Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard were with him.
Oh, hell yes. Ken Patera.
Yeah,
Big John Studd.
Ken Patera and,
I mean, we can just keep... wasn't Paul Orndorff with him, too, for a while?
Yeah, well, anyone that feuded with Hogan was because they sided with Heenan.
That's right, yeah.
And that was the reason I hated Orndorff as a kid.
Well, and because I think about it, he had King Harley Race, he had King Haku.
And, Harley Race was older at the time.
Yeah.
And not as mobile as it used to be.
Well,
so
I had him on.
Throw him in there.
I interviewed Harley Race, and he said what happened was that they were at a house show, and he was wrestling Hogan. That was the whole time. We know him and Hogan with Bobby the Brain. And somehow or another, he got put through a table, and when he did, it hurt his hip, and that's why he had to retire. So that run was supposed to still go, but he ended up getting hurt, and that's what happened to the Harley Race, King Harley Race. Yeah. So
I didn't know that. I knew that they were, they feuded, but I didn't know
Well,
that's
and
why
you
it
know,
ended.
and we were kids back then, so we didn't know all that stuff. But to hear him talk about it, because I asked him, I said, why did you leave? I mean, it seemed like that was such a big deal. And yeah, he said he got hurt really bad, and that was the end of it. So.
See, and back then they would have never told that's what happened.
Oh gosh, no. Just disappear and look, it's King Haku. What? But yeah, that's like I said, it's kind of nice to reminisce, and when you really start thinking about all the things that Bobby did during his time, and I don't think wrestling would be where it's at right now, and I don't think a guy like Jerry Lawler would have been as big as he was during the Attitude Era if it hadn't been for Bobby the Brain Heenan.
No, I don't think so either. And really, you think about his show with Gorilla Monsoon, I think he did a lot for corded phones.
Yeah. Oh, my. And the Oinkettes. Don't forget the Oinkettes.
Paulie Dangerously got his mobile phone from.
Yep. But, yeah, that's pretty much it. And, Tom, thank you very much for sharing some memories with us, and we appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. Glad to do it anytime.
All right. And that's going to do it for this week's show. Thanks a lot for joining us as we kind of reminisced about the great Bobby the Brain Heenan. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at UTRR Podcast. You can also find us on Facebook and go to undertheringreport.com to subscribe to keep up to date on the latest episodes of the Under the Ring Report. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Hello there, wrestling fans. This is Ken Patera, the world's strongest wrestler. And if you don't listen to Under the Ring Report, I'm going to jump down your throat, tap dance on your liver, and dare your heart to beat. You get it?
Thanks for listening to the Under the Ring Report. Please visit undertheringreport.com and subscribe for free so you can listen every week to the Under the Ring Report.